Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Sporting Fan Podcast. Today I'm going to talk about something that's quite a controversial topic within the NRL, and that is to do with the topic surrounding player transfers. And I'm going to go into a broad few subtopics within that. That includes, obviously the player transfer system that it is at the moment, as well as the salary cap and potentially having a player draft in this podcast. So, let's get straight into it. The reason why this is a controversial topic is because, unlike many other sports, there isn't a designated trade window in the NRL for players to transfer. But, however, when a player comes off contract, basically 12 months before the contract ends, they're allowed to negotiate with another team. So, for example, if your contract ends after the 2022 season, you are allowed to negotiate with other clubs from November 2021. So you might not play for that club until 2023, but you're allowed to negotiate with them from November 2021. A recent example of this, one that came straight to mind, simply because he signed with a club that I support, is Brandon Smith. Currently signed with the Melbourne Storm, exactly the situation that I just described. His contract ends at the end of 2022, so he will not play for the Roosters until 2023, but he signed with the Roosters in November 2021. And a lot of clubs, it's happened to basically, this kind of situation, similar to Brandon Smith, has happened to practically every club. I don't think, basically you could name a club and they have someone that's done this exact situation, whereas they've had 12 months to go on the contract and go elsewhere. So this has basically annoyed fans across the board. People hate it is because they're basically, people basically criticize it because they say, well, as much as that person might be fully committed to the club, until they leave, they might enjoy it. It's just that they needed, for example, if they're originally from Brisbane and they playing in Sydney, they might want to be going back to Brisbane. So they might be motivated to play for a good season, but people say, how do we really know if they're still motivated? So that's kind of annoyed a lot of fans. People who criticise the current situation say that the NRL should have assigned transfer windows, similar to what a lot of other sports have. Possibly have a 1 month trade window in the middle of the season and one at the end of the season. A 2 month transfer window at the end of the season. Before people go back to, before the players go back to pre-season training. Personally, I'm kind of in the middle. Whether it be for example, that 1 month trade window in the middle, is basically for the end of the season. You leave at the end of the season. The reason why I'm kind of in the middle is, I'll give my own personal example. I've never worked in the sports field, but I do know what it's like to sign a contract with a company well in advance before going there. I won't go into too much detail into what happened, but basically, people who knew me at the time knows the situation. Basically, wasn't happy with my current employer. And wanted to leave. I signed with another company in October, and I was due to start in February the following year. And basically, vast majority of my motivation had gone to work at that place before I signed with the other company, simply because they had treated me and so many of my friends so badly. But yeah, it was basically, as the months went on, especially that last really 3 to 4 weeks was really hard, and it was like, do I really want to be here? Do I really want to continue working every day, getting up early for a company that I know hasn't treated me too well and doesn't really care about me? That's kind of this, like, where I can understand why the situation where people say, oh, that's the exact reason why you shouldn't allow a situation where players can sign a contract so far, like 12 months in advance, because the motivation will just go down in that situation. But the reason why I'm also saying the other side, luckily for me in my situation, I was living in the same city, so I was just going from working in the Bondi area to working in the CBD. But look, let's take the Brandon Smith one. I believe I used that earlier. So basically, in his situation, he's moving from Melbourne to Sydney, right? So yeah, and let's say he signed. There's a 2-month trade. Let's say there's a 2-month trade window at the end of the period. He signs, say, November 26 or whatever, no, November 28. So towards the end of November, like the last week of November, then he has to get the pre-season, provided he hasn't played for New Zealand, which he probably will. But let's say, for argument's sake, he doesn't. Pre-season training, they have 8 weeks at the end of the season, post-grand final, where they have off. They start, say, December 1. He's only got a handful of days to move to Sydney, organise flight, accommodation, get all his stuff up, whereas, and within a few days. So basically where I believe it should be is, I don't believe it should be 12 months, but I do believe, like, for example, if you have a 1-month trade window in the middle, say July or say post Origin, just have a 1-month trade window where it's basically saying you can negotiate in this period, can sign contracts for the end of the season. If you want to do a mid-season shift, this is your only chance to do it. And then you're allowed to go. So it doesn't get, like, it allows people to get their, organize their lives. The people deserve, like, people have to remember that athletes are people as well. Especially if they've got young kids, which a lot of players do. A lot of them have young kids in the NRL. So they had to set up schools and search up schools and what have you. So, people, it gives people time to set up their lives moving to another city. But again, and it also keeps fans a little bit happier, whereas they're not having, knowing for the whole season that a player's leaving and questioning whether they're really motivated. So that's what I believe. They allow, this allows, everything to be weighed up. It's in the best interest for the club. I think all the clubs involved, the fans, and the player involved. So there'll also be less accusations of, that player doesn't care. And this is my basically limited understanding of how the soccer transfers work. Basically, they have a 2-month transfer window. in July and August, and a 1 month trade window in January. Basically, this is the only time that players can actually be where players can leave. I believe you can still sign contracts with another club in between that period. However, you have to wait until the next trade window. So potentially that could be an option. That's where I think, it seems to work for soccer. So soccer/football, depending on what you say. But yeah, that's what I believe. I think it works for them. So there doesn't seem to be too many problems with that. So I believe that that is something that the NRL can look at it and do, because then they'll keep fans happy. Maybe if you have that 1 month window in the middle, if say they sign in the first half, they have to leave in the mid season. So that could be also a solution. The one thing is that, some might argue this might cause another problem. Might be a mad rush to sign everyone. Some clubs might, if they do have that 2 month window, some might argue that some clubs will wait to that and just get into salary cap problems. We've seen it in the past where teams have got into salary cap issues for different reasons. Teams like the Melbourne Storm between 2006 and 2010, as well. Between 2006 and 2010, and the Bulldogs of 2002, where they had a stack of quality players, had some success, and like in any industry, other teams tried to recruit successful players, and as a result, they needed to keep pushing up their contracts in order to remain successful, to keep the best players, and that ended up putting the Bulldogs of 2002 as well as the Melbourne Storm between 2006 and 2010 actually over the salary cap. Or on the flip side, if teams have been unsuccessful for a period of time, such as the West Tigers or the Bulldogs of the last 5 years, they had to keep buying players over the market value, because that is the only way they could attract players, is basically paying them more than what they're worth. For example, they signed Russell Packer on a massive deal. They signed Josh Reynolds on a massive deal, and they're basically playing in reserve grade. I know these weren't great. Those are just a couple of examples where, they want a short-term fix. They basically need a short-term fix. By having a transfer window, some might say it might put upward pressure, simply because it would be a mad rush to sign players, and some teams will end up paying more than what someone is worth, or paying more than what they had hoped, and because they know they are in salary cap, and that might cause salary cap problems, because teams just realize, okay, we needed someone by this date, otherwise we're not going to get them. We can't have a mid-season transfer. But I don't think that would, personally, I don't think that would happen, because clubs know who's leaving or who wants to leave, so they have a budget, and they know what they need. So they have a budget in mind, and they say and they know what they need. So they will go to the market and look at who's available and say, we're going after these players, and this is the maximum we're going to pay a player in that position. So it's a halfback with a lot of experience. So we're going after for example, I know he's a 5'8", but Cam Monster, say, we're going to pay him $1 million max. Whereas if we're going after someone with less experience, say Sam Walker, who's obviously going to be a quality player in the future, but right now we're going to pay him $500,000 a year. Teams know what their contracts are, and there's also safeguards from the NRL saying, like, look, if you keep paying these, you're going to go over. So I don't think that will be a problem in that regard. However, on that note, a lot of fans say, why have a salary cap at all, considering it's clearly not working, as the bottom teams are frequently having to pay overs to get players, and in many cases, they're just unable to get them with the salary cap restraints. They're not able to have the secondary players coming up, and they're not really getting the value for money. So why not just abolish it and have open season? Personally, I don't think this will be a good idea, as many clubs are already struggling financially, as it is with the salary cap. So if there is no salary cap, clubs will continually have to pay more. Player agents are going to push up player contracts, and clubs will have to continue playing more and more for players, and it might end up in a situation like the Super League was, where it just got out of control with contracts. A lot of players were getting a lot more than what they were actually worth. You have average players getting what the most elite players were getting, and then the elite players were, well, prior to the Super League wars, they were, like, basically average players were getting the money off the elite players, and then the elite players were getting off the chart. Salaries were off the charts, and a lot of clubs didn't survive. Where they had, some clubs had to merge, like the West Tigers and the West Tigers merged. So they had Balmain Tigers and the Western Suburbs Magpies. Or another example is the Manly Seagulls and the North Sydney Bears. Another example, Dragons and Steelers. And a lot of these, with these mergers, they don't seem to really work. There seems to be problems. The Manly and Bears one, which created the Northern Eagles, they only lasted 3 years, I believe, before Manly went it alone. And then the Bears are now in reserve grade. West Tigers and I just had multitude of problems because both the Tigers and Magpies boards are trying to push each other, yet like basically savage each other, saying we want control, no, we want control. And yeah, sure, the Tigers won a premiership in 2005, but really have been unsuccessful outside that. And the Dragons have only really had... The Dragons did have success, but it was basically, for the first probably 10 years of their existence, up until probably around 2011 after Bennett left. They did have quite a bit of success, although making the finals quite regularly. But basically, yeah, I know it's called the St. George Illawarra Dragons now, but everyone knows the Dragons are really the dominant partner there, and they're basically running things. Or alternatively, could end up like South and a lot of other clubs where they just went broke, and and as well as a lot of clubs were brought in, like the Western Reds, Adelaide Rams. There was a second Hunter team, and they just they couldn't financially survive. So the NRL doesn't want this again. They don't want the comp to end up like... The other thing is they also don't want the competition to end up like the soccer in Europe, whereby every year the same clubs win the competition. With the richest clubs win the comp basically every year. Like, for example, in Spain, it's basically Barcelona or Real Madrid virtually every year. In England, it's really only about 5 or 6 clubs that, I know Leicester won it one year, but it's mainly like Man City, Or Man U hasn't won it for a while, but you had Man City, Man U. You have Liverpool, Chelsea. Like, these kind of clubs are basically winning it every year. PSG, in what's it called? Paris and France. So, like, they're basically winning it every year. So it gets kind of boring, and I think they'll kind of lose a lot of fans if it's the same teams winning it every year. The other thing is, like, to be able to compete in the UEFA Champions League, which is the soccer competition in Europe. Teams are paying ridiculous amounts for salaries, and now many clubs are struggling to pay it. For example, Lionel Messi left Barcelona because they couldn't afford his contract anymore. I believe he was on about 100 million. Was he 100 million euros or 100 million equivalent of 100 million Australian, or whatever it was? They couldn't pay him that kind of salary anymore. They wanted to. He even offered to take half that, and then they said, "We can't even afford that." And so he ended up leaving, and then he went to PSG, who has just re-signed one of the best up-and-coming players, re-signed, I should say, not signed, re-signed Kylian Mbappe, French World Cup winner in 2018. I believe he was only 18 at the time. On some massive deal, I read it was in the neighbourhood of something like $895 million Australian. The club has been posting losses for the last. I'm not sure how long that $895 million, but I believe it's about $200 million signing bonus plus other things on top of that. But PSG's been posting losses for a number of years, and believe it was either Real Madrid or Barcelona were actually trying to sign Kylian Mbappe, and they actually lodged a complaint with a lot of regulatory bodies in France, simply because they said these guys can't pay. These guys are posting losses. How are they able to pay this? How are they able to pay this guy a massive upgrade? And so the NRL doesn't want to end up like in a similar situation where that, where clubs are losing millions of dollars a year, and it puts stress on the league's clubs just to stay competitive. And that's half the reason why the salary cap was brought in, so we don't have a repeat of the Super League wars, where clubs were just spending massive money on contracts and they just simply couldn't afford it. And obviously the other half the reason why it was brought in was simply to make sure that every team has a chance of winning it, not just a handful of clubs that are very wealthy and they have wealthy owners. Something that, which brings me to my next point, something that has been brought up to try to make to try to level out the playing field is a draft. Basically any junior that's coming through the grades, once they're ready for the NRL, they will be eligible for the draft, similar to what, basically the NFL, basically all the American sports, the AFL does it, and all that. But I don't think this will really work in the NRL. This is because many clubs sign junior players. Like, they sign them when they're very young. When they're about, a lot of players get signed when they're 13, 14, 15 years old, and they come up in a particular system in a particular team, and then and then if that team loses that player in the draft, they lose that investment because another team picks them up. A classic example of this would be the Penrith Panthers. Quite a lot of their players were in the junior system at some point, whether they came through when they were older or when they were 16, 17, 18, or when they were a lot younger. Like, for example, Stephen Crichton and Jerome Luai have been there basically the whole lives. They came through the whole junior system from a very young age. Charlie Staines, I believe he's from the bush. He's from country New South Wales, but he came in when he was in his mid to late teens, as well as a few other players. Penrith put a lot of money into these players coming through. Now imagine if, for example, they have another bloke coming through that, say, fullback or a centre or whatever, someone similar like a Stephen Crichton or one of the Charlie Staines or Jerome Luai coming through the system now, where they are going to fill a position where Penrith might be short or might be better than the current player, and they put a lot of money into those players. Now imagine, because Penrith have been doing well the last couple of years, they made the grand final in 2020, they won the comp last year, they would get an absolutely rubbish drop pick. They'll probably be, the 20, probably a 20 or 30th draft pick or something would be the first pick. And if there's someone like a Nathan Cleary or a Jerome Luai or a Stephen Crichton or, insert a Penrith junior here, they would lose them, because virtually all those blokes would be picked up by all the other clubs. And they'll say, well, that's not fair because we put all the investment in, we've done the development, and now they've been signed off. But then they say, there might be, you can put a certain number of players that are exemptions. Like, let's say you can have 3 exemptions a year on players that you invest in. But, for example, look at using the Penrith example again. Virtually all those blokes are around the same age. So, yes, they're might have a problem in 10 years' time when all those guys are, 30, but in their 30s. But you also have to look, a lot of those blokes probably would have been lost to Penrith. They probably would have only been able to keep a few of those players. So I don't think that would work. And a solution to that might be is if the NRL took over the junior development. This would take away some costs for the club because they were not doing the junior system, but this would also create other problems, and I don't think it would work. Simply because, for starters, a lot of the clubs are tribal. They want to play in the junior systems that they grew up in. Like, for example, Victor Radley, he's a Bronte boy. He would want to play in the Roosters junior system. He would want to play for the Roosters in the juniors. Adam Reynolds at South, all these Penrith blokes. And that's the other problem that it might create. That, if you get drafted, you grow up supporting Penrith, the Roosters, Rabbitohs, whoever, and then you get drafted to a club that you might not even want to play with. And, imagine if you grew up supporting the Roosters your whole life, and then you get drafted to South. You won't be, when you've been in the Rooster system your whole juniors, and, you had a good shot at making the Roosters, and then now you've lost. You'd get angry. You'd be pretty annoyed. Or vice versa, if the Roosters picked up someone that wanted to play for South. And the other problem is that a lot of these clubs, they go on to come into the junior representative teams. They play junior Origin and these kind of competitions. So that would cause a lot of other issues that I don't think the NRL, a lot of people that support the NRL have thought about that, the kind of problems that would create if the NRL created a draft. Like, the NRL is quite different. The culture around the NRL is a lot different to what it is in other sports because there's a lot more tribalism in it. And of course there is a lot of tribalism in other sports. Like, for example, if you're a Manchester United player, a Manchester United supporter, you'd want to play for Manchester United. You wouldn't want to play for Liverpool or Manchester City. But yeah, that's where it could create a problem where, you know, you're forcing someone to play for something that they don't want to be. Like, it's a different situation if the club doesn't sign them. Like, for example, Penrith has one of the biggest junior development systems, and if Penrith doesn't want that player, it just doesn't fit. Like, for example, if you're a halfback coming through, you could be, you know, Sam Walker coming through at Penrith, but you wouldn't get a gig at Penrith at the moment because you got Nathan Cleary and Jerome Law in the halves there. Like, Sam Walker's an absolute freak, right? And I know people will say, oh, well, Sam Walker didn't come through at Penrith. I'm using that as an example. Like, I'm just saying, theoretically, if he did come through the system there right now, and he's 19 now, if he came through the Penrith system, he wouldn't be able to get a gig because Nathan Cleary and Jerome Luai are there. Like, if Penrith would say, well, you're a gun, but you don't have a future here, then you can see why he would leave. But, you know, let's say if Nathan Cleary and Jerome Luai weren't there, like, look at last year with Matt Burton. You know, last year when blokes were getting in, when Penrith had a few injuries or they had blokes out with representative duties, he filled in there. And, you know, that's where it could be good for those clubs where they develop the players. So it's a lot more tribal with the NRL. I don't think a draft would ultimately work to level the playing field. It is a tough situation because, you know, obviously you have to identify young players at a young age and try to, and there's a lot of blokes that, you know, they look like superstars when they're, you know, 16, 17, 18, and then when they get to first grade, they fall flat on the face, as the expression goes. And then you got other players that, you know, come through when they're, you know, 18, 19, 20, and then they end up being, you know, world beater when they make first grade at 21. So, you know, there's always, you know, exceptions to the rule, but yeah, I think the best thing that the NRL could do is keep the salary cap in place, and just fix up the transfer windows. Like, having it where a player can't stay more than a few months before they ultimately leave the club, so that fans don't have this anger that a player's playing a whole season before they leave. That's what I believe. Hopefully the NRL does do something about this because it's one issue that really does need to be addressed and it really needs to be fixed. And I think, it's not, like I said, not an easy fix, but these are my solutions, and I'd like to hear what you think or how you think it could be fixed, because obviously, like everything, you know, I don't always have all the answers, but there always could be a solution. All the ideas come together and we can make things a lot better. So it'd be interesting to hear what you think about this, your feelings on it, how you would fix it. So please tell me once you, after listening, please tell me what you think. You know, until next time, have a good one.